Mariel Santos and Victor Baranov, one a brave dancer desperate to expose the truth, the other a ruthless Russian club owner hiding a deadly human trafficking empire, collided in a deadly game of secrets, lies, and murder that shocked the world. Mariel Santos stepped into Moscow with a hopeful heart, carrying only a small suitcase and the belief that she had finally found the opportunity her family needed. The job offer came through an agency that promised legal paperwork, steady pay, and a safe environment for foreign performers. She imagined bright stages, supportive co-workers, and a chance to build a better future. But the moment she arrived, the city felt colder than she expected, not just in temperature but in atmosphere. The driver who picked her up barely spoke and kept glancing at his phone as if following strict instructions. Mariel tried to ignore her unease, convincing herself that nerves were normal in a new place. When the car stopped in front of Velvet Night, the building looked impressive, covered in gold lights that shimmered against the night sky. Expensive cars lined the curb, and the entrance was guarded by tall men in black coats. To an outsider, it looked glamorous and exclusive. Inside, the club felt even more overwhelming. Smoke machines, heavy music, and wealthy patrons filled the space. But behind the glamour, Mariel noticed something unsettling. The dancers moved with precision, yet their faces lacked joy. Their eyes looked distant, almost hollow, as if performing was no longer a choice but a requirement. Mariel was led to a back office where her passport was taken without explanation. She was told it was 4 administrative steps, but there was no documentation or timeline for its return. She was then shown to a shared room upstairs with creaky beds and barred windows, far from the luxurious image the club portrayed. The other dancers barely spoke, offering only brief, nervous nods. Within hours, Mariel realized this job was nothing like what she had imagined. The air felt heavy, filled with unspoken warnings, and the people around her moved as if controlled by an invisible force. Mariel adjusted to life inside Velvet Night far more quickly than she wanted to, mostly because she had no choice. Every day followed the same rigid pattern: rehearsals in the afternoon, performances at night, and strict curfews that prevented anyone from leaving the building except during approved hours. The deeper she moved into this routine, the more she noticed disturbing details that others pretended not to see. New dancers arrived every few weeks, but they rarely stayed long. One moment they were on stage beside her, and the next, their beds were empty with no explanation. Their belongings were left untouched, as if they had planned to return but never got the chance. Restricted hallways drew Mariel's attention the most. Certain doors were always locked, but she occasionally heard muffled sounds behind them, cries, footsteps, or heavy thuds. The guard station near these areas acted tense and defensive, discouraging anyone from getting too close. One guard in particular seemed to study Mariel with suspicion, as though waiting for her to make a mistake. It made her constantly aware of every step she took. The remaining dancers carried fear in their expressions. Some avoided talking altogether, while others whispered warnings in short, broken sentences before quickly falling silent. One girl pointed her eyes toward the basement stairs once, giving Mariel a look that said more than words ever could. Whatever was down there, no one wanted to be near it. The staff's behavior made things worse. They froze whenever Victor Baranov entered the club, bowing their heads or stepping aside as if he controlled their very breath. Mariel tried to stay calm, convincing herself she was imagining things. But the evidence around her kept building. She knew the disappearances weren't normal. She knew the locked rooms weren't harmless. And she knew the club hid something far more dangerous than anyone dared to admit. Mariel's turning point came late one night after an exhausting shift. She was gathering her things from the dressing room when she noticed a phone wedged between the wall and a leg of the vanity table. It didn't belong to anyone currently in the room. The wallpaper on the lock screen showed the smiling face of Alina, a dancer who had vanished 3 days earlier without packing a single item. Mariel hesitated before picking it up, her hands trembling slightly. She knew she should leave it where it was, yet her curiosity and concern pushed her forward. To her surprise, the phone wasn't locked. It opened straight to the camera roll, and what she saw made her stomach twist. The first video showed Alina sitting in a dimly lit room, her eyes red and swollen, her face tense with fear. Mariel quickly scrolled further, finding more clips, this time featuring other girls who had disappeared before Alina. Some looked injured, others exhausted, and all of them appeared to be forced to speak in front of the camera. The videos had dates and short file names that looked like codes. Mariel realized she had stumbled upon proof of something much worse than simple mistreatment. She opened the Notes app and found lists of names paired with numbers, destinations, and dates. Some names belonged to girls she had known personally. Others were unfamiliar but clearly part of the same pattern. Mariel understood these were records, evidence of trafficking. Her heart pounded as she transferred everything to her own phone, carefully checking that every file was copied. She wiped her fingerprints off the device, then hid it inside a small opening in the ventilation duct behind her locker. As she looked around the silent dressing room, a chilling awareness settled over her. Someone had hidden this phone on purpose, hoping it would be found. And now that she had it, Mariel knew she was no longer just a dancer trapped in a cruel system. She was holding the very evidence that could take down Viktor Baranov's entire operation, or cost her life. Viktor Baranov's world stretched far beyond the glittering floors of Velvet Night. While the club appeared to be a high-end entertainment venue on the surface, it operated as the central hub of a much larger and more dangerous empire. Mariel slowly pieced this together from whispers among staff, the coded lists in Alina's phone, and the unusual visitors who arrived through private entrances late at night. Wealthy businessmen, politicians, and criminal figures frequently met with Viktor in his restricted offices, entering with confidence and leaving with expressions that suggested mutual secrets rather than simple business deals. Every part of the club was built around control. Dancers were required to sign documents they didn't fully understand. Their visas were confiscated under the excuse of safekeeping. Phones were checked randomly. The guards were not ordinary employees but men with military training, hired specifically to watch, intimidate, and silence. Mariel noticed how quickly they responded whenever a girl tried to question a rule or show the slightest sign of resistance. Such girls were escorted to the basement area, and none returned to regular duty afterward. The basement, though rarely mentioned, seemed to be the heart of Viktor's hidden operations. Supplies were delivered there at irregular hours, guarded with unusual intensity. Mariel once glimpsed a shipment being carried down, large wooden crates with no labels. One of the guards slammed the door shut the moment he saw her nearby. The message was clear: curiosity was dangerous. Through the evidence she had collected, Mariel understood that Viktor's network extended to several countries. Girls were transported through forged documents and sold to clients across Europe and Asia. Viktor handled everything with an icy calm, giving orders through brief messages or gestures. His cold, unblinking stare made even senior staff shrink back in fear. No one challenged him, not even the police officers who occasionally visited the club for private meetings. By the end of her second month, Mariel knew she was living inside a machine built on exploitation and violence. The luxury above ground was nothing more than a mask. Beneath it lay a system designed to trap women, strip them of choices, and silence them before they could reach the outside world. Viktor's empire thrived on secrecy, and Mariel now understood more of it than anyone intended her to. Mariel spent several days planning her escape with the same quiet precision she used in her dance routines. She knew she needed a moment when the guards were distracted, a route that wasn't monitored, and a way to alert someone outside the club about what she had discovered. Her chance came on a cold afternoon when the dancers were given a short break before evening rehearsals. Instead of returning to her room, she slipped out through a side door meant for deliveries and walked quickly toward a small internet cafe she had noticed during previous outings. Inside the cafe, she sat at the corner computer and tried to upload the videos, photos, and lists she had gathered to a human rights organization in Manila. The connection was sluggish, pages froze, and her hands shook as every passing pedestrian made her glance behind her. She managed to send a portion of the evidence before the computer abruptly logged her out. She didn't know if it was a coincidence or if someone had traced her activity. Her heartbeat rushed as she hurried back to the club before curfew, hoping her absence had gone unnoticed. That night, she packed the few belongings she had, her phone, a change of clothes, and the tiny envelope of money she managed to save. She waited until the club grew quiet and the guards rotated shifts. Her breath felt trapped in her chest as she stepped into the dim hallway, listening carefully for footsteps. When she finally reached the back exit, her hands were cold with fear. She opened the door slowly and slipped into the alley behind the club. The street was silent except for distant traffic. Mariel moved quickly toward the taxi stand near the river, believing she had finally broken free. What she didn't know was that the security team had discovered traces of her cafe activity. The missing phone had been noticed, and Victor's men were already searching for the person responsible. Every step Mariel took toward freedom was shadowed by the danger closing in behind her. Viktor Baranov learned about the missing phone and the suspicious internet activity long before Mariel realized she had been exposed. His security chief informed him that someone had attempted to send files to an overseas organization from a public computer. The moment Victor heard this, he understood exactly what must have happened. Only a dancer would have access to the kind of evidence stored on Alina's device, and only someone desperate would risk contacting people outside Russia. Victor's expression didn't change, but the atmosphere inside his office shifted sharply. He gave a short order, and within minutes, his men began checking every dancer's belongings and reviewing footage from the club's internal cameras. When they found records of Mariel slipping out during break hours, Victor's suspicion solidified. But instead of confronting her, he preferred to observe quietly. He believed mistakes revealed more than confessions. He instructed his men to follow her without alerting her, wanting to know whether she had already shared the evidence or had copies hidden elsewhere. Victor moved with patience, the kind that came from years of operating in secrecy. He handled the situation not with anger, but with the cold calculation of a man protecting a profitable empire. As Mariel walked through the dark streets toward the taxi stand, Victor's men tracked her from a distance. They moved without sound, blending into the shadows like part of the city itself. Every stop she made, every glance over her shoulder, was reported directly to Victor. He watched the updates with a chilling calm, knowing the outcome was no longer uncertain. Mariel had become a threat, and threats were never allowed to survive. By the time Mariel reached the bridge near the river, the men tailing her had already received their final instructions. Victor wanted the evidence recovered, the girl silenced, and the situation erased before sunrise. To him, it wasn't personal. It was business, cold, brutal, and absolute. The city's surveillance system captured the final moments of Mariel's movements in fragmented, grainy footage that later became crucial evidence. At 2:12 a.m., she appeared on a bridge not far from the river, clutching her small bag as she walked quickly across the dimly lit pathway. The cold wind pushed against her, and her steps seemed unsteady, as if she sensed danger approaching but didn't know from which direction it would come. Streetlights flickered, casting broken shadows that made the scene appear even more unsettling. Mariel kept glancing over her shoulder, her body tense, her pace increasing each time she looked back. Two men appeared at the edge of the camera's frame shortly after she crossed the midpoint of the bridge. They kept a calculated distance, never getting close enough to startle her but always close enough not to lose her. Their movements were slow, steady, and purposeful. They blended easily with the empty street, never running, never rushing, only following with confidence that came from knowing exactly how the night would end. Traffic was nearly non-existent at that hour, giving them no obstacles and leaving Mariel isolated. A black SUV entered the frame a minute later, approaching from the far end of the bridge. The vehicle slowed as it neared Mariel, then stopped completely just outside the reach of the streetlights. The doors remained closed for a few seconds, creating a moment of eerie stillness. By the time Mariel stepped closer to the railing, appearing confused or frightened by the sudden stop, the two men behind her quickened their pace. The camera didn't catch the exact moment she disappeared. She simply stepped beyond the tower of the bridge, and then her figure was gone. The SUV door opened briefly, a shadow moved inside, and the vehicle drove away without speeding. To the world, she vanished in less than 7 seconds, swallowed by the darkness, the silence, and the men who had been ordered to erase her. For 3 long weeks, Mariel's disappearance went unreported, unnoticed, and deliberately ignored by those inside Velvet Night. The dancers who remained were too afraid to speak, and the staff acted as though she had never existed. Outside the club, the city moved on with its usual pace, crowds filling the streets, tourists taking photos, and officials turning their attention elsewhere. It wasn't until a pair of hikers wandered deep into a frozen forest outside Moscow that the truth finally began to surface. They had taken a wrong turn on a narrow trail, hoping to find a shortcut, when they noticed something unusual beneath a cluster of snow-covered branches. At first, it looked like discarded clothing stuck in the frost. But as they moved closer, they realized it was something far more disturbing. A human arm, stiff and pale from the cold, jutted out from a shallow snow drift. The hikers immediately contacted authorities, and within hours, the remote forest was surrounded by police vehicles, forensic tents, and floodlights that cut through the icy gloom. Investigators worked carefully, documenting every branch, every footprint, and every piece of disturbed soil. The body was partially frozen, making it difficult to move, and showed clear signs of suffering, bruises, markings on the wrists and ankles, and injuries that hinted at prolonged restraint. The face had been badly damaged, either intentionally or through exposure to the elements, making immediate identification impossible. For days, forensic teams tried to determine who the victim was, but progress was slow. Eventually, a small detail provided the breakthrough: a delicate tattoo on the inner wrist, partly protected from the cold, matched one listed in travel records for an overseas performer. Dental records confirmed the worst. It was Mariel. Despite the horrifying discovery, the case was quickly categorized as a possible immigration-related incident, limiting further investigation. Official statements were brief and vague, carefully avoiding connections to any larger criminal operations. Behind the scenes, Victor's influence ensured that questions were redirected, paperwork was delayed, and attention stayed minimal. In the end, Mariel's body was found, but her story remained buried, at least for the moment. Months after Mariel's body was discovered, the story of Velvet Night might have remained hidden forever if not for one man who finally chose to speak. A former security guard named Dmitry, who had worked under Viktor Baranov for years, had grown increasingly fearful of the escalating crimes he witnessed. Each month, he saw new dancers arrive and vanish without explanation. He watched as Viktor controlled every aspect of their lives, using intimidation, threats, and violence to keep them silent. Dmitry had once believed it was best to stay quiet to protect himself, but Mariel's disappearance had haunted him. Her bravery, her attempt to expose the truth, became a mirror for his own conscience. Dmitry secretly gathered as much information as he could. He copied documents, screenshots, and financial records that outlined Viktor's operations, from payment logs to travel arrangements for the trafficked women. He even retrieved some of the videos Mariel had found, which were still stored in the club's secure digital network. Carefully avoiding detection, he compiled everything into files that could expose the full scope of Viktor's empire. Unable to confront authorities directly due to fear of retaliation, Dmitry sent the files anonymously to investigative journalists and human rights organizations. Within days, the information spread online, revealing shocking details: the names of missing dancers, evidence of trafficking routes across multiple countries, and records of payments from wealthy clients who knowingly participated in the operation. Among the files was proof that Viktor had personally ordered Mariel's abduction and murder once he discovered she had attempted to leak evidence abroad. The leak caused immediate outrage, both locally and internationally. Authorities could no longer ignore the case, and public pressure forced investigators to act. For the first time, Velvet Night's carefully maintained facade began to crumble. Victor's influence was no longer enough to shield him from scrutiny, and the full extent of his crime started to emerge. Mariel's courage had not been in vain. Her story became the spark that ignited a reckoning within the shadowy world Victor had built. The pressure on Viktor Baranov mounted quickly after Dmitri's leak went public. International agencies and local law enforcement coordinated for the first time, acting on the overwhelming evidence that had finally been exposed. Raids were conducted at Velvet Night and several other properties linked to Victor. Investigators discovered hidden rooms, cages, and storage areas that held documents, personal items, and digital evidence confirming years of human trafficking. Dozens of victims were found, many traumatized but alive, providing testimony about the systematic abuse and exploitation they had endured. Each story painted a clearer picture of Victor's operation, revealing a web that extended far beyond Moscow to parts of Eastern Europe and Asia. Victor attempted to evade capture, fleeing toward a private airstrip with the intention of leaving the country undetected. However, authorities were prepared. He was intercepted before boarding a plane, and the arrest was swift and decisive. During the search of his personal safe, officials discovered Mariel's missing phone, still containing the evidence she had fought to preserve. The phone's contents corroborated the whistleblower files, linking Victor directly to both trafficking operations and Mariel's murder. The trial that followed became an international sensation. Charges included organized human trafficking, multiple counts of abuse, and first-degree murder. Victor's calm, unflinching demeanor during hearings contrasted sharply with the horror of his crimes, and the evidence presented left no room for doubt. While Victor remained a symbol of cruelty, Mariel's story emerged as a testament to courage in the face of unimaginable danger. Her attempts to expose the truth, though tragically ending in her death, ultimately helped dismantle a vast criminal empire and bring justice to dozens of victims. Though Mariel never survived, her bravery inspired others to speak out, and her legacy became a symbol of resistance against those who exploit the vulnerable. Through her sacrifice, the world saw how one determined individual could ignite change, even against the most powerful and dangerous adversaries.